Welcome to the Daily Exchange. We're here talking about Bitcoin Cash has gone down a bit. eToro got some new products. We've got Kain here joining us from Havven. We'll see you guys right after this. That's awesome. Welcome back, guys. We've got Kain joining us here from Havven, also Blue Shift as well. Kain, welcome to Daily Exchange.
Thanks for having me.
No worries, my man. Well, we've got to talk a little bit about the market now. I think you've got some interesting views as well. Market trading, I guess, a bit on the sideways style, a little bit, I guess. Bit of red, we've got all sorts of colors, really. Bitcoin right now, it's around that 6370 mark, 6384. It depends on whether you're trading Tether or not, I guess, these days.
It really does. It really does, yeah. It's like a 2% premium.
We're going to talk about stablecoins in a bit as well, obviously, which is really cool. And you've just come back from talking about Ethereum now, trading at around $212 right now. You've just come back from Devcon 4,
I have,
which is, I guess, the big Ethereum development conference,
Yeah,
right?
it's the yearly meetup and, get together for all the Ethereum people. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
And what sort of was some of the most exciting pieces of news from that?
I think, it's pretty clear that Serenity, which is formerly known as Ethereum 2.0 or Shasper, is getting a little bit closer. There's certainly been some ups and downs and stops and starts in the process, but Vlad and some of the other core devs just released a sort of intro white paper into Casper CBC. So some stuff is starting to solidify, which is great. So personally, I'm very bullish on Ethereum, and I think that scaling will happen. It's just kind of a matter of time. And I think that everyone who's working on it is taking a very slow and steady approach to it and not trying to rush it out. I mean, it's a huge network that they're managing, so they need to be very careful about upgrades. So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Okay. And what does that mean, I guess, you said Serenity. What does that actually mean for Ethereum?
So there's a bunch of different things that are kind of wrapped up in Serenity, but the main thrust of it is that it's about getting Ethereum to scale. So transitioning away from proof of work and onto proof of stake,
right.
And allowing for much higher throughput, much faster transactions, a whole bunch of improvements to the underlying sort of protocol of Ethereum, the consensus protocol. So
okay, wow.
Yeah, it's super exciting, and everyone's been waiting for it for a really long time. And there's a bunch of stuff that has been kind of tested and some of it thrown away. But again, it feels like we're getting pretty close to something that's going to work.
And we reported before there was some news about Ethereum looking to use ZK snarks to scale a bit quicker.
Yeah.
Things like Plasma obviously proof of stake and things like that. Was there any talk about ZK snarks coming in, or?
It was actually interesting. There were, I think, at least 8 different talks on ZK snarks. So Zuku was there. So it was super interesting to see that kind of intersection between the Zcash community and Ethereum community. I think it's certainly, privacy is a hugely important thing. So it's certainly interesting to see two communities working together that closely. And, the Ethereum community very much realizes the power of ZK snarks and that sort of technology. So it was good to see.
Anything direct from Vitalik himself, like any chat or things that he's sort of looking at?
I mean, his keynote was pretty positive. I think while kind of admitting that there were a number of things that were dead ends, there was definitely a lot of positivity around kind of getting to that next stage and sort of formalizing it. So, there's a bunch of teams working on a whole bunch of different things, and again, some of them are starting to really solidify. So It's good. Yeah, it's really good.
Moving on to Bitcoin Cash, I guess the hard fork November 15, the hype seems to be pulling out. A bit of gas coming out of the price. I think we're back down to $524, currently trading at, $530, almost down 6%. We've got a bit of a weekly chart here, Joel, which is interesting. And we were just talking about this before. It's incredible how fast the news spreads.
Yeah.
Like that's insane.
Yeah. You see something posted on Twitter, whether it's from whoever, someone involved, and immediately there's a response, and then a counter response, and yeah, the cycle is just super fast.
Just moves.
Yeah.
I guess we got. Have you got a monthly chart here, Joel, as well? Right.
Yeah.
We've really gone up and then pulled back a bit, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, it's still pretty unclear how it's all going to play out. The hash power, where it's going to go. I haven't been following it that closely, but it's certainly kind of an interesting sort of end game, I guess, to the whole, which Bitcoin cashes Bitcoin story. So, yeah.
Well, Joel, we've got the Bitcoin Cash SV and Bitcoin Cash ABC on Poloniex currently trading. Apparently, as well, if you sum these together, you get very close to 1 Bitcoin. So it's $527 there, which is interesting, right? I guess trying to pick which one's the most valuable. I wonder if the original Bitcoin Cash, does that just disappear? Or that looks like it's trading ever so slightly underneath 1 Bitcoin Cash itself, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I have to imagine it's going to be a bit of a shit show, given what we've seen so far.
There's a lot of heavy swings coming.
It's going to be interesting, yeah.
Cool. Let's talk about moving forward. Kain, you are the founder of Havven. Do you want to give us first a bit of an overview? What is Havven? How would you describe it?
Havven is a decentralized stablecoin. So, all of the stablecoins we know and love and sometimes hate, like Tether and other fiat-backed stablecoins, are, I guess, different approaches to the same problem, which is how do you have a crypto asset that is non-volatile? How do you reduce volatility in crypto assets? So ultimately, Havven is one approach to that problem, to solving that problem of volatility.
So normal stablecoins use a reserve fiat, to have a one-to-one stablecoin.
Yeah, that's right.
You guys have obviously got a different route. Let's get into talking about how this works.
Sure. So yeah, I mean the fiat coin scenario, Tether was the first one, right? It's been around for a long time. There's other approaches like BitShares, Maker's DAI, which are designed to be more decentralized, because the fiat coins are backed by something that's in the real world, which means that you need to trust someone to protect that asset backing.
Mm-hmm. And so with the way it works, so you've got Havven that you use to collateralize the stablecoin, which is Nomans or
that's right,
NUSD currently, and we'll talk about that. Obviously, we've got some plans for the future.
Sure.
And I guess what are how does that Nomans price stay stable?
It ultimately is reliant on this pool of collateral. So the Havven token is a collateral pool, which is, think of it as like those fiat reserves, right? The big difference is that the fiat reserves can issue one-to-one, right? So if you've got $100,000 worth of fiat in a bank, you can issue 100,000 stablecoins. Right? With a crypto asset as collateral, you need to be more careful than that. You can't issue up to the full value. You need to have a buffer. So in our case, we keep the network 500% collateralized. So there's 5 times more collateral than the stablecoins that are circulating, which basically means that we can sustain a drop of 80%. It's similar to Maker. Maker has a similar buffer, but their threshold is about 150%. And the reason why they can have a smaller buffer is because the asset that they use is Ethereum, which is a lot less volatile than Havven, because it's got a larger market cap, etc. So so that's essentially the idea, is just to keep that buffer between the collateral value and the circulating stablecoins as large as possible to protect against price shocks.
And so how are Nomans issued?
So you're holding Havens, let's say, and you go to an interface that we built called Minter, where you will lock your havens. So let's say you've got $100 worth of havens. You lock those havens and you issue 20 NUSD, so $20 worth of NUSD, which you can then sell, you can hold, you can do whatever you want with it. You can trade it, on KuCoin or one of the other exchanges. But essentially you're borrowing against the value of your havens and you're selling it into the market. And so people who want to hold an asset that is stable can then buy the NUSD from you, and they can hold it themselves or trade it themselves or do whatever they want. So it's reliant on individual Havven holders locking their collateral and issuing. So there's no central management of the system.
And how do you ensure that the Havven tokens are still do become worth less than the nomans. I guess they collateralize.
Yeah,
500%.
So that's the trick, right? Is keeping that buffer quite large. So if the price drops, the second thing is that if the price starts to fall of havens, there's incentives built into the system to get people to pull some of the NUSD off the market. So your individual collateralization ratio is what determines how many fees you get. So if, for example, you've issued and the price has dropped, you're going to get less fees. Right. And that fee discount that you get, or the reduction in fees, can be quite sharp, right? It goes down to about 75%. So
let's talk about, so less fees. Just quickly, so let's talk about first, you've got these Havven tokens. You issue nomans.
Yep.
How do the fees work within that?
So think about it as like a decentralized PayPal, right? So when you're using PayPal, you sign up for the service. As a merchant, you accept money via PayPal and you pay fees to accept that because it's better than accepting checks or cash or whatever, right? So the idea is that PayPal that's collecting those fees is then passing the fees on to someone else, an internal company, a centralized entity, right? With us, the individual fees that people pay when they transact in nomans are paid to Havven holders. So they go into a pool and they're distributed based on how many havens you're holding, your collateralization ratio, how well you're performing, etc. So essentially, it's this decentralized payment network where you don't need to sign up for anything. You can literally just start accepting NUSD, and every time NUSD is transferred, there's a fee that's collected, and it's paid to Havven holders.
And then so is that for every transaction that happens with nomans?
Correct. On-chain. Every on-chain transaction.
On-chain.
Yeah.
Right. So not in exchanges, but within, so on-chain. And then, is it proportional to the amount of Havven you have, or
It's proportional to the amount that you've issued. So if you are a Havven holder who's just sitting back and hasn't issued any NUSD, then you get no fees. You have to actually participate in the network, and then once you've participated, you have an obligation to maintain that collateralization ratio. So you're incentivized. If you are doing a bad job, you're going to get less fees.
Right. So that's incredible. And then to get your Havven back, do you just have to buy the nomans and put them back in your thing?
It. Yeah, you just burn the NUSD. So you can buy them, you can pull them from your wallet, you can buy them off an exchange, whatever you need to do. So when you go to Minter, you will see, for example, that let's say you issued 2 weeks ago and the price has dropped by 10%, you'll see exactly how many NUSD you need to burn to get your collateralization ratio back. So you can then go and buy them, you can trade them for something else, whatever you need to do.
Cool. And tell us, what are the main sort of use cases of nomans?
So the essential idea is that we want within crypto platforms, within dApps, within crypto networks, for people to be able to trade or use something as a payment that they know. Right? For accessibility and for UX, which we've talked about before, if you're pricing something in some random token that no one's ever heard of, right, it makes it really hard for a user to come and understand what the alternative that they could purchase in the real world versus in the crypto world would cost them. They're like, okay, it's 58 of those tokens. They're trading at 10 cents right now, so it's $5.80 versus it would cost me $10 in the real world, right? Whereas if you have an asset that's priced in US dollars or Australian dollars, someone can easily compare. They can look at, okay, if I go to AWS, it's going to cost me $100 a month. If I use, IPFS, it's going to cost me $50 a month. And they can easily see because the asset is actually priced in dollars that they know, right? So it's about accessibility and real-world adoption and allowing people within those systems, those decentralized systems, to not rely on a third party to ensure the value. So with a fiat coin, obviously like Tether or TrueUSD, if you're operating in a decentralized network, you still have to trust someone. So it kind of reduces the value of the entire proposition, basically.
Mm-hmm. And I guess for a lot of those use cases, I guess you would need sort of on-chain transactions. So what sort of use cases do you see that happening? I guess because trading in and out on an exchange is not. I suppose that's not really on-chain.
No, it's not. Yeah, I mean, just the sort of deposits in and withdrawals out, they're on-chain.
Right.
But everything else is going to be off-chain, right? So if you're trading on KuCoin, it could be $10 million a day. It won't actually be paying Havven holders, right, for those transactions. Right. So one thing that we are very positive on, which has kind of been interesting and in the news, I guess, is DEXs. Right, so we saw the SEC enforcement action happen with Ether Delta, which is a little bit concerning, although I think for some people probably not unanticipated. And it's going to be a question of what is the impact on DEXs, because DEXs are predominantly on-chain. With the matching of orders and they're non-custodial. So if you and I are trading on a DEX, that actually will incur fees, and those fees will be paid to Havven holders.
Right, makes sense. Oh, because the smart contracts executed and
it's on chain.
They move addresses.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So for us, the trading we want to see, and we're working with some decentralized exchanges to get listed, and there's a few even in Australia that are popping up. Which again, NAUD when it comes out will be very useful for that, because you can have quote pairs that are in a currency that people get.
Awesome. In terms of coming up, we're going to get into talking about Nomans a little bit more in a sec.
Sure.
I just want to. Coming up in November, you said you've got some interesting news coming up. Do you want to share with that community what's sort of coming up?
For sure. So we've got two big releases coming up. The first is open minting. So that means that everyone, at the moment we're kind of in this beta test. There's about 200 people that are whitelisted to be able to use the system, and that was to kind of shake out any bugs or issues. But by the end of the month, we'll have anyone who's got Havens, you will be able to just go to Minter and start to issue and interact with the system. So we have about 70,000 people that are holding Havens at the moment, because we did some airdrops and bounties and a bunch of other things. So there's about 70,000 people right now that will be able to go and interact with Minter and start to use it and issue NUSD, etc. The second thing that's coming alongside that is synthetic assets or multiple currencies. So we're going to be supporting a bunch of different currencies, but initially it'll be AUD is one of them. The Korean won is another one. We'll also be supporting gold as well as a synthetic asset. So that's super interesting. So if you're a gold trader who's also into crypto, kind of a good overlap for you.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So it's 1-to-1 with the gold price?
With an ounce of gold, yeah.
With an ounce of gold?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And with, I guess, we've kind of covered it, but maybe just to be clear for everyone, the tokenomics with Havven, if you're a token holder, how does it go up in value?
So the essential idea is very similar to Bitcoin or Ethereum, that as Havven, the network, is capturing this economic activity through the fees. The fees are paid as a reward to Havven holders, and those rewards should create positive feedback loop in the network. So if we can get to a point where we're supporting millions of dollars a day in on-chain transactions, that's going to have a positive impact on Havven. Absolutely. And that's important because we need, and this is one of the challenges as well, is because the asset's on-chain, because the entire system's on-chain, we need that the sort of collateral value, the network value at the moment, which is about $13 million, we need that to increase in order to be able to support more circulating currency. But they kind of go in tandem. As demand for the stablecoin increases, the collateral value increases, and you can kind of ratchet up and ratchet back down to maintain that stability.
Awesome. Yeah. That's really awesome. Okay, let's talk about Nomans, because Nomans obviously a key part to the Havven system. And they are currently available and trading on KuCoin.
That's right.
Is there any other place, just to start with, are there any other places you talked about DEXs?
We're talking to a couple of DEXs. So we just listed Havven on Paradex. So we're in talks with them of getting NUSD listed as well. We've actually got NUSD listed on Cryptology, which is another centralized exchange. And then, as you can imagine, we're always in talks with various exchanges to try and get Havven and NUSD listed. I think the interesting thing, though, will be that when we have NAUD, there's a lot of Australian exchanges, which through Blue Shift, we work with them, we've got good relationships. We would love to see NAUD supported on some of the local exchanges to provide local AUD quote pairs.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And just for everyone's benefit, do you want to just talk a little bit about what is Blue Shift? I know about it, but just so everyone can know about it.
Sure. Yeah, Blue Shift kind of flies under the radar a little bit, right? Because it's this network that you can go in. There's about 1,250 retail locations around Australia, and you can go in and make purchases for cryptocurrency. There's a bunch of other payment types, but cryptocurrency is one of the big ones. And we work with CoinSpot, CoinJar, Bitcoin.com.au, a bunch of exchanges around Australia to allow their customers to come in and pay cash directly and get crypto.
Okay, cool.
So one one of the big questions around stablecoins is where do the fiat on-ramps and off-ramps come from? So, while we've had this USD stablecoin for almost 6 months now, it is kind of difficult to get people to come in and pay cash for a US dollar backed asset, right?
Yes.
What we really want is an AUD pegged asset to make it as easy as possible for people to come in and out. So that's kind of one of the things on the roadmap.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I guess you've listed also, so just moving on, I guess, with Nomans,
Yeah.
you talked about it being potentially used for e-commerce transactions.
That's right. Yeah.
Rather than just, I guess, a trading tool. Tell us, how do you think e-commerce would benefit from using Nomans?
So I used to be in e-commerce. I used to be in retail. So e-commerce is kind of something that's near and dear to me. And one of the big frictions that people don't realize with e-commerce is fraud prevention. Not just the direct costs, but the indirect costs as well. And so when you're using something like PayPal or credit card processors, you've got a ton of fraud typically, and it can be quite difficult to manage. And so even just managing the relationship with someone like PayPal, particularly if you're in a high fraud risk category, someone like Kogan, for example, selling TVs and laptops and stuff, they have massive infrastructure to protect against fraud. So if you're Kogan and you now say, well, actually, we're going to support NAUD, you get rid of all of that fraud risk, right? Because when you send them NAUD,
you've got it.
You've got it. It's done, right? Just like when you send Bitcoin, the only issue is when you send Bitcoin, you've got that volatility risk.
Sure.
So if you can remove the volatility risk and have that immutable transaction value, it makes it really, really powerful, particularly for low margin businesses. People selling electronics and various other things like that. It's really powerful.
And how are you sort of taking steps to get it integrated into e-commerce platforms? What sort of?
So, again, it's kind of one of those things where NUSD was the obvious first choice, but NAUD is going to be something that is much easier for us to reach out to local retailers and say, hey, we want you to try this out. We think that users will like it. We think it'll reduce your costs, reduce fraud rates, etc. So it's something that is very much on the radar, but we need to get NAUD out there first. So almost there, about a month away, but by the time we get to early next year, we'll be working on a bunch of partnerships there.
Awesome. And with your e-commerce partnerships, any ones you wanted to sort of?
There's nothing I can announce yet,
okay.
Unfortunately. But I've got good relationships with a lot of retailers around Australia, so it's certainly something again that's very high priority for us. Okay,
let's talk about some of the issues, just high level potential issues, or challenges, I guess, with Nomans and Havven. Obviously, when Nomans can only be created when Havven holders stake their Havven tokens. And could Nomans encounter a supply issue if not enough Havven tokens are staked?
I mean, I would make the argument that they're encountering that supply issue right now. There's only about $1.5 million worth of circulating currency. So we actually have that problem right now. And, that's one of the things that we're looking to do to drive adoption to kind of alleviate that issue. It's a challenge in having a crypto asset backed solution when you've got fiat backed. There's almost infinite supplies of fiat, right? You can just print more if you run out. So when you're using crypto assets, that certainty of having the crypto asset there is also a constraint on how quickly the network can scale.
Awesome. And I guess Havven, could encounter a liquidity issue if too much Havven was also staked as well.
It could. Yeah.
Which is interesting.
It is interesting.
But obviously, limiting the supply can be, positively influence the price.
For sure. Yeah.
But low liquidity obviously can also have a negative effect on the price. I guess how do you sort of want to, or how are you sort of attempting to deal with that?
It's a super interesting question, and it's a great question actually that doesn't get asked enough. Price discovery kind of happens from liquidity, right? If you don't have liquidity, then price discovery suffers, right? So you could imagine a scenario where everyone's incentivized to issue NUSD and all the havens are locked up and there's none available, right? Now, in practical terms, that never happens because people will want to liquidate, but we will certainly have to ensure that there is liquidity there, and we've got market makers that assist with that. We've got some large funds that participated as well that, obviously will be actively participating in the network. So it's not just about providing the stability, but there actually has to be enough of a float there to ensure that people can get in and out of the network. One thing that we also will, allow, over time is that if there are issues with pricing, one of the updates to the system is that people will be able to directly redeem their NUSD from under-collateralized Havven holders. So the way that that works is, let's say you've let the price drop too low, right? And you've got a bunch of Havens sitting there. Someone would be able to directly sell their NUSD to you without you kind of controlling it, and they'll get some Havens back. So that's kind of one way at a worst case scenario to ensure that there's some liquidity there. But it's certainly, it's something that, we think about and, hopefully won't be a huge issue in the early days, but, in the long term, we need to look at it.
Interesting challenge, that one.
Yeah.
I guess, in terms of, scaling as well, and bringing stability, if a lot of, nomans are traded on exchange and not on, dexes and other things like that, what sort of mechanisms are you using to sort of ensure that stability and scalability of nomans? In that way, I guess, or alleviate some of those challenges.
For sure. I mean, the first thing is you need to provide places for people to use on-chain, nomans, right? To use NUSD on-chain, and so that's why we're looking to integrate with, some of the dexes out there to allow that, so if someone does want to trade, they can trade on-chain. Second thing is that as part of our multi-currency launch, you'll actually be able to swap between different currencies without a counterparty, because you're essentially holding your own asset and you're converting it into a different asset, different synthetic asset. So let's say, for example, I sent you NUSD and you wanted to hold NAUD, you'd actually be able to go and on-chain do a transaction to swap your NUSD with yourself into NAUD.
Right.
And so that's something that we think will drive some on-chain activity as well, as people try and rebalance, particularly if people are wanting to hold a synthetic version of gold or platinum or silver or whatever it is that they want to hold. So as we roll out those new assets, it's not trading per se, because you're not trading with anyone, you're just converting your asset, but all of that stuff happens on chain.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So it's almost Forex within the network.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. It's cool. Like a synthetic Forex. Yeah. But no counterparty. You're just swapping something between yourself.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I guess part of the motivation, behind developing Havven was you wanted to avoid the risk of centralized off-chain assets.
That's right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that to start with? So your reasons for building Havven?
Yeah, you can see I'm wearing my Institute of Crypto Anarchy shirt, right? So it's a place in Prague where Devcon was held, where they've been kind of advocating for crypto for a long time now. So as a crypto anarchist myself, I have a very strong belief that crypto will enable systems to be built that are much fairer. Right, that's kind of one of the fundamental tenets, right? That where you have these large entities or edifices of power that are unjustified, crypto will be able to disintermediate them in a way that other technologies maybe haven't been able to. Now, there's a lot of sort of speculation in the space around how that will play out. Personally, I'm an optimist, so I hope that it'll play out in the right way, and I think that we're all kind of obligated to ensure that it does. And in that vein, building something that is as decentralized as it can be and doesn't require trust in a central authority, right? So, at the moment with Havven, there's some trust that you need to have in us, in our ability to actually execute and build out the system, and continue to improve it and respond to market threats and all that sort of stuff. But we're a foundation, not a for-profit entity. So there's no incentive for us to do this on the basis of, trying to extract rent from the network or whatever. We're actually just putting it out there as an open source piece of software that anyone can use. And I had someone talk to me the other day who said, I want to use NUSD for this, but I'm worried that there might be a conflict. And I said, there's no conflict. You can compete with us, you can not compete with us, you can do whatever you want. We're just here to put this out there in the world. And I think that those kinds of systems that enable new platforms to be built that are more accessible for everyday people, even though we're not even close to there yet, but that's the goal. We need to be going in the right direction. And so when you look at things like Tether and TrueUSD and the fiat coins, my sense is that's the wrong direction, because you're just re-injecting that trust and central authority into something that's supposed to be trustless. And that's why I find them problematic. Not because I don't think they'll work or I think they're a scam or anything. I just think that ideologically they're not aligned with what we're trying to do.
Right.
So yeah.
Is there any risk, being indexed towards US dollars?
There is, so if the US dollar was to hyperinflate, that would be problematic, right? So one of the hedges against that, I guess, is that you'll have these synthetic assets. Okay. So, let's say you're a gold bug and you think that the US dollar is, a scam or whatever. You can hold this synthetic gold, which is great actually, because it means that you've got this non-custodial gold tracking solution that gives you, kind of the best of both worlds. Platinum could be silver, could be whatever asset you want to hold, and it's completely trustless. Or, that's the intent, right? That it's a trustless solution.
So do you think that, I guess, coins that are indexed to other assets are possible?
I think they're possible. It's a little bit harder than doing fiat currencies, because fiat currencies are relatively stable.
Yes.
Over long time horizons, they're not stable because inflation tends to erode their purchasing power. But in the short term, I guess let's say, for example, you've got a synthetic asset that's tracking palladium or something like that, right? If there's a huge spike in demand, that could create issues, because ultimately the Havven holders are providing the underpinning for that asset, yes, right? And so if one of these assets spikes or drops, that has an impact on Havven holders. And so, we want to kind of minimize that risk a little bit, but there's also ways that they can hedge that risk by looking at what the synthetic assets people are holding, and they can, outside of the system, hold or hedge against those assets appreciating. So there's things that people can do to try and minimize the risk, but ultimately, we want really the initial use case to be fiat currencies, because they're relatively stable. We can have some of these synthetic assets, but it's going to take time to kind of grow the security around those, I suppose. So
Makes
safety.
Sense. Just sideline question. Do you have any views on the Venezuelan petro?
I think it's like Tether on steroids, right? Like, if you could find something worse than Tether, the petro is possibly it. So I'm not a huge fan of the petro. I think it's an interesting experiment, but ultimately it's a bit concerning.
Cool. I guess talking a little bit about stablecoins, what are your views in terms of fiat collateralized stablecoins?
I mean, as I sort of said, I think they're pragmatic. Like, I've used Tether, right? I can't say that I've never used Tether. I've even taken advantage of some of the dips and traded against and what have you, right? Because I trade not super actively, but I do trade. I've got an account on Kraken and I use it. And so, it's an interesting question of pragmatism, and having something that's a useful solution. Until Maker released DAI, back in December of last year, there really wasn't an alternative, right? So your choice was to have no non-volatile crypto asset, right? Or to have something that was a significant compromise. And I think that we have to be pragmatic, but we also have to look at where the state of the technology is. And once we get to a point where we have something like DAI or NUSD or Basis or some of the other things that are coming out, that we recognize that they're a better solution and we start to adopt them. It just takes time.
Okay. Do you think this is? I guess you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but and this is not financial advice, by the way. No financial advice is given on the show. Do you think the controversy around? There's a lot of controversy around Tether, right?
Yep.
Do you actually think Tether is backed? Like, what's your sort of view?
I do actually. Yeah, I think Tether is fully backed. I think the people who don't believe it's fully backed, you have to remember, Bitfinex and Tether are obviously very closely related entities, right? It's unclear exactly how closely related, but they're very closely related. So, Bitfinex makes a lot of money and has made a lot of money for a very long time. It would be extremely strange if they were in a position to have this asset-backed solution, which was really only designed to enable more trading fees, right? Like you have to ask the question: what's the business model of Tether? The business model of Tether is more trading. The more trading that happens, the more money that all the exchanges make. And so, given how important that was, I think where the FUD came from was basically the lack of transparency, right? Why can't they be transparent? Why can't they audit? The answer is that, as we've seen in Australia, banks will shut you down. If you're running a crypto exchange, even if you're doing everything above board, banks will shut you down. They'll close accounts. They'll do all kinds of stuff to you, right? Because the banks particularly in Australia, have seen crypto as a threat for a long time. So if you're Tether and you're operating this bank account with several $1 billion in it, you're not going to want to disclose. And we saw it as soon as it was disclosed that they were using HSBC. That account got shut down. They got moved to a different bank, and so people have kind of created this story or this kind of conspiracy theory around they're not being transparent because the funds aren't there. But I think the reality is they're not being transparent because they can't. And we've seen they've already, as soon as the TrueUSD and Gemini and Paxos and everything have started to gain traction, they've started to wind it back. Because if you're Tether and you can ensure that you're going to get what you want, which is a lot of trading, from someone else doing the work, why would you keep operating Tether? So I think there's a very high likelihood that over the next 12 to 18 months that the entire Tether ecosystem could just be wound back and it'll be replaced by these other solutions.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because there's no real reason to continue operating. I mean, they make a little bit of money with exchanges and people depositing and withdrawing, but it's nothing compared to the exchange fees that they generate. So, other than maybe having some control over it, but again, I would argue that they probably prefer to not have control. And this is totally speculative. I don't know this for sure, but this is just my theory that why would you want to operate this thing if there's someone else who's going to operate it for you for free?
Mm-hmm. Totally. And they're just, Bitfinex can then keep trading more.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see when Bitfinex, maybe they already have, I'm not sure, starts to enable some of these other trading pairs, right? If and when they do that, I think that'll be a strong signal, and they probably need to be careful to not create even more FUD if they start doing this. But I think as it winds down, they'll have to replace it with something else, and as soon as that happens, that'll kind of be the indication that this, we're headed to kind of the last days of Tether.
With so with stablecoins, they could potentially, I guess. Do you think they pose a threat to other cryptocurrencies? Like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Monero, Dash. Maybe particularly XRP, or we've got to be careful on the show.
Yeah,
XRP and
XRP,
Ripple.
yep.
XRP and Ripple obviously have nothing to do with each other. These are completely separate entities.
Of course.
Even though one might own a large amount of the other.
It's total coincidence.
Totally separate. This is not financial advice.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with Ripple and XRP having anything to do with each other. Let's look about XRP.
Yeah.
Do you think XRP is under threat from stablecoins?
I think XRP is under threat from reality, to be honest, right? The fact that people are still under the impression that it's solving a problem is kind of astounding to me. The use case of like interbank settlement or whatever the story is these days it just kind of boggles the mind that you would think that it would make sense to use this even more volatile illiquid asset than, say, Bitcoin, if you were trying to do that. If banks genuinely wanted to use a cryptocurrency that was volatile for interbank settlement, it's not going to be Ripple, right? So if that's the use case, it's going to be something else. Now, whether it's Bitcoin or whatever, or why it wouldn't be Bitcoin, I don't know. But certainly from a bank's perspective, if you had the sort of requisite liquidity and enough supply of something like TrueUSD, you would have to imagine that would be better. They're not going to use Tether, obviously, but something like TrueUSD or Paxos or whatever is a far superior solution to what the proposed XRP solution is. So I just don't see over the long term. But it's an interesting case study in the irrationality of markets, right? Like how long does it take the market to realize that this thing is not going to work? Who knows? Could take years, could take decades. We don't know. It's one of the interesting things about crypto assets that as long as people are willing to trade them, price discovery is not really based on any kind of underlying value. It's just price action. It could take a long time before the market realizes that that's not going to happen. I mean, it might take someone adopting stablecoins or all the banks adopting stablecoins, but I kind of somehow feel like even if that were to happen, the narrative would just shift to something else and we'd just go down the road that way. But it'll be interesting to see.
It's one of those things, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in terms of motivation, we talked about with e-commerce platforms, obviously reducing fraud.
Yep.
Do you think, could an e-commerce provider even use, another cryptocurrency as opposed to a stablecoin? Do you think it's even possible?
I mean, it doesn't really make that much sense to me that they would, with the one caveat, I suppose, that ultimately people need to have the thing, right? So if people aren't holding something, then they're not going to want to use it, right? So you need to provide significant incremental utility for users in order for them to hold something. So I think once you see wallet providers that are allowing people to kind of hold stablecoins as a hedge, more people will have them sitting in a wallet. It'll be easier for them to then spend it. But right now, if you said, what's the cryptocurrency that you should enable payments in right now, if you're, let's say, a Harvey Norman or a JB Hi-Fi or something like that, it's Bitcoin. There's people with a lot of Bitcoin that want to spend it. It makes a lot of sense to enable Bitcoin payments because people will come in and they'll buy TVs, they'll buy fridges, all that sort of thing. They're not holding significant supplies of stablecoins to even use them, right? So I think in the short term, it still makes sense for the traditional cryptocurrencies, the large cap cryptocurrencies. But over time, as people have more access to stablecoins, we might see that shift.
Okay. And in terms of what's coming up next for Havven, where are you guys what's the next steps?
Yeah, I mean, we've got all the stuff going on Ethereum, but then in addition to that, we've also got a launch on EOS. So, EOS is an interesting case. I mean, there's been a little bit of, sort of news lately about some research reports and various things that have happened with EOS. I guess I'm probably personally agnostic, but as a project, I think Havven's goal is to support payments in decentralized systems, right? So wherever there's activity in a decentralized system, whether it's EOS, Tezos, Ethereum, wherever, right? The Lightning Network, we want to be able to support payments there because we want to be able to, provide utility and therefore capture fees. That's the idea, right? And so, if dApps are building on EOS, then we need to be there. Whether or not long term it makes sense or who's going to win, I think that's really hard for anyone to predict. But certainly, if there's activity, we want to support it. So that's something that's coming out. We've got an announcement even today, I think, about a snapshot for Havven holders because there's going to be a large airdrop to Havven holders on EOS. So I think we'll have some news about that this afternoon.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What would that mean? So EOS holders would get some Havens?
So no, it's actually going to be Havven holders on Ethereum will get some of the EOS Havens. So if you're holding Havven right now,
yes,
and let's say you've got a few thousand Havven sitting there in a wallet, we'll take a snapshot of a certain block number, and we will then say, okay, this is the block number that. If you are still holding those Havens, you will get granted 50% of the Havens on EOS when it launches.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so basically to bring that Havven network that we've got now across to EOS and kind of seed it initially with people who can support the network and collateralize it, etc. So
that's wicked.
Yeah.
Any trends you're sort of seeing in the market right now? I guess we've got Bitcoin Cash has sort of pulled back a bit.
Yep.
There's been a lot of news, we've got BACT launching, this ETF things and all those things. What's your sort of take on the market right now?
I guess the interesting thing for me, it does feel a little bit like that kind of 2016 period where we were sitting, trading around $600, kind of going up and down, going sideways, not really seeing much happening. And it feels a little bit like that to me because there was, a lot of good news kind of coming around, right? We'd come out of crypto winter-ish, right? We're coming out of it. And every bit of good news would just kind of wouldn't really move the dial, right? And so I think that we're seeing things like that now where, there's some amazing, obviously there's some bad news, like the SEC enforcement, but predominantly the last month and a half has been good news, right? No major hacks or other craziness, and yet we're kind of seeing this sideways thing. And that to me feels like we're just in this accumulation phase where, people are still just picking up. They've got their price thresholds that they're willing to buy under. And so every time Bitcoin drops below 6,500, people are kind of picking it up. Eventually, there'll be no sellers, right? And once the sellers run out, then the price has to go the other direction. So it's just a question in my mind of how long does that take. I do feel like there's the possibility of another dip before we get to the end of the year. But if the price that we've kind of seen that sort of 6,000, 6,100 threshold holds, then I think that we'll see a bit of a rebound and positivity into next year. But who knows? Who knows?
Hard to tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. Yeah.
What's your sort of prediction, I guess, for 2019? What do you think's going to happen there? What's 2019? You think all about?
I mean, we've already seen it a little bit this year, and I'll talk mainly about the Ethereum community, but there's some really positive stuff happening elsewhere, like bulletproofs in Monero and sapling with Zcash. There's a lot of really positive delivery happening, right? Which we kind of didn't see in 2017. It was a lot of speculation, not much delivery. This year, we've seen so many things delivered, and the market really kind of hasn't priced that in because we've just been in this macro downtrend. So I think once everyone kind of catches their breath and takes some time off for the holidays and comes back, they're going to see all of these amazing things that have been built over the last 12 months. And I think even more is going to come online. And so I think that we'll start to see some positivity around usage and adoption and a whole bunch of other things because adoption's interesting. You've got this huge problem space and a lack of connectivity between different solutions. And I think we're starting to see some of those gaps be filled in, with different dApps and different platforms starting to leverage each other. And that type of thing where you start to see that, connectivity happening, those network effects can be really powerful. And so you can go from, it seems like nothing's happening to, wow, everything's happening in a really short period of time. And as you kind of alluded to, crypto moves at light speed. So, it could be over the course of a month, everyone goes, whoa, like this is crazy, right? And we really start to see a lot more awareness pick up. But, again, it just kind of depends on how quickly we can deliver all the stuff that we promised.
Makes sense. Apart from Havven, any sort of projects that you find interesting that you're looking at?
I mean, I'm a big fan of the privacy coins. I think that, fundamentally, what they're kind of doing in pushing the state of the art is critical. And we're already seeing projects like Ethereum start to incorporate some of those the bits of technology that are being created. And so I think that as that happens, again, you start to see this interconnectivity where, you've got private contracts on Ethereum launched and what have you. So, the privacy coins like Monero and Zcash, I think are huge because they're just pushing the state of the art in what can be done, to kind of have private transactions and private computation.
That's really cool. And I guess we ask everyone, it's midnight this year, 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
What do you think the price in US dollars of Bitcoin will be?
My sense is I'm going to go with
financial advice, by the way.
Definitely not. It's definitely not. My sense is that there's pretty high likelihood that we could have a nice run into towards the new year. So I'm going to say 8,300 US.
8,300. Very cool. Awesome. All right, well, let's move on. We'll talk a little bit about eToro has been making a lot of movement right now in the market.
Yep.
It's been quite an interesting venue because you were previously trading without getting the actual coins itself.
Yep.
Which is interesting. Do you want to bring up the video, Joel, we've got here? They have recently launched a iOS and Android wallet to support Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, and Litecoin. We don't have a video. Okay. But we do have the CEO, Yoni. I actually have met Yoni as well.
Okay.
He's a cool guy.
Right. Yeah, nice.
The eToro wallet today is just the beginning, and we will be adding a whole host of additional functionality, which will include supporting additional crypto and fiat tokens, crypto to crypto conversion, the ability to deposit fiat, payment in store, and more. So they're going to send more coins. Potentially, one of them could be Binance Coin as well, which is really interesting.
It is super interesting. Yeah.
And they're also potentially announcing the actual ability to trade it. This is the review on Finder of eToro. And I guess following the announcement, we got in touch with Guy Hirsch, who was the managing director of eToro. He said, "We want to be a blockchain powerhouse. We want to be a company that offers access, creating and investing. We essentially want to lead the pack with regards to what blockchain can offer our users." So you want to make it clear that eToro wants to double down on crypto, potentially launch an exchange in the future. Because it's interesting because they were really they're a CFD platform, right?
Yeah.
That's what I know them as.
Yeah.
They got that social trading and things like that, which is interesting. That's a big bold plan, I guess, to some extent. And then I think that this is the part I'm interested in your thoughts on. They've gone on to talk about a wealth inequality project called Good Dollar.
Yeah.
Now, good dollar is an actual cryptocurrency, right? It's an experiment on how to reduce the wealth inequality using blockchain. So this is like, I guess, this whole idea of a base income, or to some extent, a universal basic income. And again, he's asked a lot of quite famous people to come on board and join him in that. And I'll read his quote here. The success of new technologies should not be measured only by their ability to power new industries and disrupt old ones, but also the ability to affect positive change in the world. Too often the tech world focuses on generating commercial value rather than societal value. That's interesting. Technology should be used to tackle the great challenges of our time. This is especially true of blockchain, which has been harnessed in many creative ways, but hasn't yet been used to tackle our really big challenges. So this universal basic income, I guess, for the needy. Now, I guess, how does this tie, because you said before, like, as a crypto anarchist and things like that, how do you feel about the idea of a universal basic income?
So, it's kind of interesting. I think as an anarchist, you have this sort of objection to power, right? The power needs to be justified. And so the financial system that we all operate within is clearly inadequate to kind of service the needs of everyone, right? And so I think that's something that I personally find, really resonates with me with crypto is the possibility, not necessarily, we haven't done it yet, but the possibility to route around these systems that are very entrenched and very powerful and protect themselves. So I also, I believe in markets as well, though. I think that markets allow for competition, and allow for the best solutions to kind of rise to the top. To a point, right? But even within markets, they can be corrupted, they can be co-opted, and so I think it's a really interesting sort of question of how can blockchain allow for us to route around these old legacy systems to create more fair, more open systems, right? Which is ultimately what we want. We just want more fair competition. If someone wants to come into a market and they want to, create a new solution, we don't want huge barriers to entry, whether they're regulatory, whether they're, anti-competitive, whatever that is. We want barriers to entry to be, as low as possible to promote as much competition as possible. And I think that when you have, free and open markets, that creates at least the environment where people can create value and they can start to sort of generate wealth and generate income.
Sure.
So having a coin that levels the playing field, if that's the intent, and I've read a little bit about Good Dollar, and I think that's kind of part of it, is super interesting, right? This idea that you're going to distribute coins to people to make it easier for them to then invest in things and what have you, but one of the questions, I guess, with cryptocurrencies at the moment is the distribution, wealth distribution. There's so much concentration of wealth, which again, I feel like is a little bit unfair, right? Given the time horizon of where we are in terms of the technology. And one of the most interesting things is that in the normal financial system, you've got this, scenario where central banks loan money, and that money then has to flow down into the economy, and it sort of flows down through. And so, if you have access to that system, you can access that giant pool of funds that are being created. Crypto is a little bit different, but because a lot of the things that we see are fixed supply, over time, because you're not creating more at the top, although proof of work solutions do somewhat do this, but less to a lesser extent. People have to spend that money. They have to spend Bitcoin, and over time, as they spend it, it gets distributed. And I think that the wealth distribution, hopefully, will end up being better than what we see in the legacy fiat system. But that's still highly speculative. We don't know what that's going to play out like. So,
interesting. All right, guys, we're going to cut us and have a look at one back at the market. Bitcoin trading at $6,409.20 that you just changed as I spoke then. Bitcoin Cash $530, Ethereum $212, EOS $5.46, and Litecoin trading at $50. It looks like Stellar's been moving quite a bit recently, 27 cents, up 4.1%.
Well, there's that big airdrop that they're doing. I think it's like $125 million or something like that. So yeah, I think that's created a little bit of excitement around it, which is funny, right? They're giving away free money and price
Everyone's in.
responds. So it's been kind of their MO since the beginning. I think I participated in the original airdrop back in like 2014. So I've got a bunch of Stellar. We're still allowed to call it Stellar, right? We don't have to call it XLM. We haven't yet separated those two things. Okay, good.
These ones are still connected.
They're still connected. Okay, good. All right. Yeah. So I've got a bunch of Stellar that I got in 2014 that I'm still holding on to. So.
All right, well, guys, do follow Kain and the Havven project. Check out, he's got his Twitter here, Kain NE, and the Havven project is an incredible project. And thank you so much, Kain, for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great.
And guys, do subscribe and do click on the little bell for the show. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Yeah!
Awesome.